I'm going to call one part of it, which is that, and this is painful to say, but Alison's not going to win. So it's only 25% reporting, so you can say, hey, that's too early. But I've covered a lot of elections. It's not too early. She's at 44,000 votes. Second place is at 224,000 votes. You're not going to close that gap. So Feinstein will move on, and right now it is too close to call between DeLeon, who's a Democrat, and James Bradley, who's a Republican, in terms of who is going to be in the general election in the runoff.
I'm still calling it. LA is still at 5%, and he's in LA and in San Francisco. He's whooping him with what's there so far. So
you think DeLeon's going to beat Bradley?
I think so. I mean, it has been fluctuating. I could be wrong, but based on what's in and what's not in, assuming there's not something where, sometimes there's weird things with the reporting, I think that the LA numbers are going to make it.
That's good for
difficult.
Democrats. So.
Yeah. So do I have any love for Kevin DeLeon? No. Do I want him instead of Bradley? Of course. You want two Democrats instead of a Democrat and a Republican. So that's why we tell you to vote in primaries. If it turns out that you had Feinstein and a Republican, you'd have the lesser of two evils. Now you have two fairly standard politicians, if we're right about this, Feinstein and DeLeon.
DeLeon has said theoretically he supports Medicare for all, so in theory he would be an improvement over Feinstein. Right. There's more room to move the needle as opposed to Feinstein, who's so stuck.
And people can change, so, and DeLeon is young. Yeah, I know. Feinstein keeps claiming she's changing. I don't believe a word of Dianne Feinstein's so-called changes. But DeLeon, would I, based on their current positions, would I prefer him to Feinstein? Yeah. And that's what happens in a general election. You're down to two people, and then you got to pick between those two people. So I have made up my mind and didn't even think about it until this moment, because up until now, we were rooting for Alison Hartson, obviously. Now, let me come back to Alison and mention two things there. One is that Alison is now in third place among the Democrats. So Feinstein, DeLeon, and then Alison Hartson. So when she went in, she had started at nothing. No name recognition, no money. She didn't take any PAC money, so she didn't have a chance of raising huge amounts. You guys, grassroots donors, I think over 10,000 of you, individual donors, gave over $400,000. She got 2,000 volunteers. She ran an absolutely amazing campaign in the incredibly limited time that she had. She only had 7 months to put together that campaign and run it. And so she beat all the other Democrats other than the two politicians. It's something. And I'm not trying to say, hey, it was amazing and we almost won. No, look at the numbers, right? And she's at 2%. And there are still a bunch of Republicans ahead of her. For now, LA and San Francisco are still outstanding as we're doing this live. And so she might move up that list, but she's not going to move up far enough to finish second, obviously. So, but I want to tell you about a very important misconception in politics. People will often shake their heads, and if you heard about Alison, you say, how could she lose to these standard corporate politicians or to Republicans in California? That doesn't make any sense. You're missing the most important thing. You heard about her, so you get that she's way better than them. And you're right. For California, putting aside my politics or your politics, her politics matches California better than any of the other candidates. I think I could fairly say that objectively. Now, look, at this point, the race is over, so I'm not trying to convince you to vote for her. It's already over. So, but the problem is that most people never got to hear about Alison Hartson. So that is the number one problem. And people keep going out, and if you're a person that's not deeply involved in politics, it's understandable. But the media also makes that same mistake, and it drives me crazy. That's their job. They're supposed to know better. So they say, well, I guess the voters wanted DeLeon or Bradley. No, the voters only heard about them because they spent millions of dollars in advertising. Whereas the progressive candidates, especially the ones that run with no corporate PAC money, don't have millions of dollars. So it's not a fair contest. They never got to hear about whether it's Alison Hartson or other progressives that were in the race. And by the way, in this case, a lot of the Republicans had no money, or the other Republicans in the race. So they never had a shot. That is exactly what's wrong with money in politics. So if you have public financing and you end the private financing, it has two advantages. One is that then they're not serving private interests. Otherwise, of course they are. We told you about this 100 times. Feinstein says no to Medicare for all, turns around 2 weeks later and takes checks from healthcare insurance companies in a fundraiser. Why do you think she did that? Why do you think she's against Medicare for all? Because that's what they paid for. That's what private financing of elections gets you. Public financing gets you people representing public interest. But the second part is not talked about enough, which is that it actually gives you, the voters, a shot at figuring out who you like better as a candidate. It's an even playing field where you actually get to hear both sides. The Republican side, the Democratic side, the progressive side, the more establishment side. And you might think, hey, I like experience, I'm going to go with Feinstein. Or she's done good things in her career. Or you might think, hey, I like the progressive, I like Alison Hartson. It at least gives you an opportunity to hear all the candidates and make an informed decision. Right now, what we have is some candidates with a giant megaphone, and all you ever hear about is them. And the other candidates you never, ever hear about. That is, it's not just unfair to the candidates, it's unfair to you guys, the voters, because you don't get your real choices. That's why we have got to get money out of politics, and we've got to end the private financing of elections. By the way, how can you do that? Well, that's the group Alison Hartson was the national director of, wolf-pac.com. You got to get in that fight, because if we don't fix that, we're never going to fix any of these elections.
And the metaphor, the megaphone is the best metaphor for it, because when you equate money to speech and people have more money, corporations and individuals have more money, guess what? They have louder speech. So a megaphone is the exact right way to describe it.
By the way, one of the things that can happen with Alison, I don't want to speak for her, I haven't talked to her at all about, we never discussed not winning, right? That's a terrible attitude to have, so we didn't have that, and we're both, I think in our own ways, killers. And so that's not how we think. But now that it's done, Alison could go back to being national director of Wolf-Pac and watch out, right? Mm-hmm. So put that organizing power back into Wolf-Pac, and that would be amazing. Mike Mineta, who was co-national director with her, who's been handling the ship without her, is fantastic. He's an excellent leader and an excellent organizer. But him and Alison have been an unbelievable team. So let's see. We'll have to talk to Alison and see what she does next.